The night Cassandra Whitfield Howe threw a gift-wrapped box into the catering trash at her own promotion party, she did it with a smile. Not a secret smile, not a nervous one. A full, deliberate, audience-facing smile, the kind a person deploys when they want everyone in the room to bear witness to a small act of theater. The box landed in the bin with a dull thud, a sound that was almost comically inadequate for what it contained. 31 people saw it happen. Cassandra made sure of that. What she did not make sure of, what in fact she could not have imagined to check, was whether any of those 31 people knew what was inside the box, or who, precisely, had put it there. Within 6 weeks, Cassandra Whitfield Howe would understand what she had actually thrown away that evening, and it would not be the gift. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. This channel is where we sit with the stories that remind us how the things we overlook tend to be the things that matter most. If this sounds like your kind of story, hit that like button now, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Marcus Howe was 38 years old the year his marriage began to unravel, though unraveling is perhaps too dramatic a word for a process that was, in truth, more like a slow and deliberate erasure. Not of the marriage itself, not at first, but of Marcus within it. He was an architect by training, a builder of structures designed to outlast the ambitions that created them, and there was a particular irony in watching someone chip away at the foundation of a thing while pretending the walls were still standing. He had met Cassandra 11 years earlier at a mutual friend's dinner party in the kind of apartment that tries too hard, exposed brick and pendant lights doing the work that furniture should have done. She had been finishing her MBA, sharp and focused and brilliantly funny in the way that people are when they are genuinely intelligent and know how to use it. Marcus had been 2 years into the consultancy practice he'd built almost entirely alone, advising mid-sized firms on structural expansion and real estate investment. He was, by any reasonable measure, doing well. But he was quiet about it. He had always been quiet about the things he had built, not from false modesty, but from a genuine belief that the work itself was the argument. Whatever needed saying, the ledger said it. They married after 3 years together. The early years were good. Genuinely good, the kind of good that does not require examination. Cassandra joined the corporate communications division of a regional management firm called Vantage Group, rose quickly through the ranks on the strength of her intelligence and her relentless social precision, and built a professional identity that she wore with an almost architectural confidence of her own. Marcus completed what would become the signature project of his first decade of practice, a mixed-use development in the northern corridor of the city that won 2 regional design awards and quietly positioned his consultancy as one of the most reliable shops in the market for a very particular kind of high-value, low-profile client. The trouble was that Marcus's success did not photograph well. There were no ribbon cuttings, no magazine profiles, no landmark buildings with his name on the door. What there was, instead, was a holding company registered quietly under a name that meant nothing to anyone who did not know where to look, a company that had, over 9 years of careful, patient investment and reinvestment, accumulated interests in 7 properties, 2 development projects, and, through a series of acquisitions that Marcus had executed with the methodical precision of someone who understood that the loudest move is rarely the best one, a controlling stake in a mid-tier management consulting firm, a firm that had, 18 months prior, completed a strategic merger with a smaller competitor. That competitor was Vantage Group, the firm where Cassandra Whitfield Howe had spent 8 years building her career. Marcus had known about the merger implications for Cassandra before she did. He had reviewed the organizational charts, seen her name in the communications division, understood that his ownership position, which had transferred quietly through the acquisition to encompass Vantage's operations, meant that he was, in the most technical and unambiguous corporate sense, Cassandra's employer. Not her direct manager, not her department head, her employer. The entity at the top of the ownership structure that signed off on budgets, approved senior promotions, and retained final authority on compensation decisions above a certain threshold. He had not told her. This is the part of the story where people divide, and I understand that. Some of you are already forming an opinion about Marcus. and I want to sit with that for a moment rather than rush past it." Marcus had a reason for his silence, and it was not the reason you might expect. It was not strategy. It was not power. It was hope. He had spent the better part of a year watching something change in Cassandra, a certain quality of attention she'd once paid to their life together, a warmth in the domestic spaces they shared that had quietly cooled, and he had told himself the disclosure would complicate everything before he understood what the everything was. He was waiting, he would later acknowledge, for the right moment. What he found, instead, was the promotion party. The promotion was genuine and deserved. Cassandra had been elevated to Senior Director of Corporate Communications, a title that came with a significant salary increase, a seat at the strategic planning table, and because Vantage's new parent company had a tradition of marking senior appointments with a formal celebration, a catered evening event in one of the firm's hired reception spaces. Marcus had been invited, as a spouse, as a formality, as the kind of guest whose presence signals domestic propriety without requiring much engagement. He had accepted the invitation and brought a gift. The gift was a small box, tastefully wrapped, containing a card, and within the card, a handwritten note. The note said, in Marcus's characteristically spare style, "Everything you have built is yours. Everything still to build is better than you know. Congratulations." Tucked beneath the card was a single folded document, a one-page summary of the organizational structure of the holding company, with one line highlighted in yellow: his name. And below it, after a neat chain of subsidiary entities, the name Vantage Group. It was not, he would later explain, intended as a revelation. It was intended as a beginning, a prompt for a conversation he had been failing to start for months. He had imagined Cassandra opening it quietly, reading it, looking up at him with that particular expression of recalibrated understanding he had once known well from her face. He had imagined the conversation they would have in the car on the way home, or the kitchen later that night. He had imagined it, he said, as a door opening. What he had not imagined was that she would not open the box at all. The party was 30 people and a buffet, and the ambient sound of people being professionally warm with each other in a hired room. Marcus arrived on time, found a place near the edge of the gathering, and watched Cassandra work the space with the fluency of someone who had been practicing social performance for years. She was good at this. He had always admired it. She moved through clusters of colleagues with practiced ease, said the right things in the right registers, accepted congratulations with a gracious deflection that made each person feel they had contributed to her success. Marcus held a glass of sparkling water and waited for the moment she would come to him. She did not come to him. He was introduced, when he was introduced at all, as "my husband Marcus," the pause before the name carrying a weight of mild impatience, as though his presence required a small internal adjustment before it could be acknowledged. He shook hands with people he had never met. He smiled at people who looked through him with the polite blankness of the professionally disinterested. He met Cassandra's manager, a smooth and confident man named Derek Pullman, who spoke about Cassandra's promotion with the proprietary enthusiasm of someone who believes they are solely responsible for the careers they have merely supervised. Derek Pullman shook Marcus's hand firmly and said, "Great lady you've got there," in the way that men like Derek Pullman say things like that, as though it were a compliment to Marcus rather than an observation about Cassandra. "She's remarkable," Marcus said, and meant it completely. An hour into the evening, someone organized the gift opening. This was apparently a Vantage tradition for senior appointments. Colleagues contributed to a group gift. The promoted person opened it in front of the room. Brief ceremony, brief applause, back to the buffet. Marcus had not known this was the format. His gift was the only individual gift in evidence. The group present was a substantial hamper of high-end items that produced the appropriate sounds of collective appreciation when Cassandra opened it. Then, someone noticed Marcus's box on the side table and passed it to Cassandra with a cheerful, "There's one more," that produced a ripple of expectant attention from the people nearby. Cassandra took the box. She looked at it. She looked at Marcus across the room, and something passed across her face. Not irritation exactly, but a kind of controlled withdrawal, as though she were deciding in real time how to manage an unwelcome variable. She had told him, he remembered now, that the party was just colleagues, nothing formal. which was her way, he had since come to understand, of suggesting he might have stayed home. She did not open the box. She turned it over once in her hands, gave a brief, bright laugh that was addressed entirely to the room and not at all to him, and said, "Oh, Marcus always goes overboard. Now you know how it is," in the voice of someone who is affectionately dismissing a habit rather than dismissing a person. Then she set the box down, and in the same fluid movement, as the room's attention was already drifting back to the hamper and the buffet, she placed it in the catering bin that stood 2 feet to her right, beneath the edge of the table. She did it smoothly, elegantly even, without malice, or at least without what looked like malice from the outside. It was the gesture of a woman managing the optics of her evening, tidying away a variable that didn't fit the narrative she was presenting to her professional world. Marcus Howe, standing at the edge of the room with a glass of water and 38 years of patient, undemonstrative life behind him, watched his wife throw away the document that contained the most significant piece of information she did not know she needed. He stood there for a moment. Then he set down his glass, retrieved his jacket from the coat rail, and left. He did not make a scene. He did not say anything to anyone. He walked to his car in the November dark, sat behind the wheel for a long moment, and felt the specific quiet of a person who has been waiting for a door and has just watched someone brick it up from the inside. The drive home took 22 minutes. He spent most of it thinking about the document in the bin. What followed were 4 weeks that Marcus would later describe, with characteristic understatement, as clarifying. Cassandra came home from the party 2 hours after he left, and if she noticed his early departure, she did not mention it. They moved through the following days with the practiced efficiency of 2 people who have learned to share a domestic space without requiring each other to be fully present in it. Meals, schedules, brief exchanges about practical matters, the architecture of a functioning household operated by 2 people who were no longer particularly interested in the house. Marcus, during this period, did something that would later prove significant. He called his attorney, a quietly brilliant woman named Adaeze Okonkwo, who had handled his corporate interests for 6 years, and he told her, in careful and precise terms, everything. The merger, the ownership position, Cassandra's employment, the party, the gift, the bin. Adaeze listened without interruption, which was her particular gift, and when he was finished, she said, "Marcus, you understand that the document in the gift, even discarded, doesn't change the legal reality of your position." "I know," he said, "and you understand that what happened at that party is emotionally significant, but legally irrelevant." "I know that too. So what are you actually asking me to do?" He was quiet for a moment. "I need to know where I stand, in both senses." What Marcus was asking, though he was still organizing the words for it, was this. He needed to understand whether his marriage was recoverable, and he needed to understand what recovering it would require him to do or undo. Over the following 2 weeks, he did what architects do when they find themselves examining a structure they are afraid might be compromised at its foundation. He looked carefully, without flinching, at everything. He reviewed their shared finances. He reviewed the pattern of the previous 18 months, the accumulation of small dismissals, the progressive disappearance of the spaces where they had once genuinely talked. He spoke with a mutual friend named Gabriel, the same person whose dinner party had introduced them 11 years ago, who listened to Marcus's careful and restrained account of recent events and said with the blunt compassion of old friendship, "She's been telling people you work for her firm, Marcus, as some kind of analyst or something. She's been describing you as junior to her." Marcus absorbed this. "When you say people, colleagues, advantage, apparently quite often." This was not legally anything. People misrepresent their spouses' careers at dinner parties constantly, and it rarely rises above the register of social embarrassment. But it told Marcus something he had been resisting knowing. The Cassandra's management of his presence at her promotion party was not an isolated act of situational impression management. It was part of a sustained, deliberate construction of a professional identity that had, somewhere along the way, required his diminishment as one of its load-bearing elements. He sat with this for several days. Then, in the 3rd week of November, Cassandra came home with news. The parent company, the holding firm above Vantage Group's current management structure, was sending a representative to conduct a routine senior leadership review. All senior directors and above would be assessed. It was, Cassandra explained over dinner with visible excitement, a significant moment. The new ownership had been mostly hands-off since the acquisition, but this review would establish the shape of the leadership going forward. It could mean another step up, she said, if I handle this right. I'm sure you will, Marcus said. Derek says the representative is someone called M. Howe, corporate development side. A beat of silence. M. Howe, Marcus said. Apparently quite senior. You don't know anyone by that name, do you? In the industry? Marcus looked at his wife across the dinner table. He considered briefly and fully every door that had ever been available to him in this conversation. Then he said, "Not that I can think of," and reached for the bread, and the moment passed. He called a daze the next morning. The review had, in fact, been scheduled months earlier as a standard procedural step following the acquisition. Marcus had signed off on it in a board context and then let his operations director handle the logistics. What had happened in the quiet and efficient administration of his corporate affairs was that the representative identified in the scheduling paperwork was listed as M. Howe, Holding Company, Corporate Development, which was a reasonable summary of his role in the structure, and nobody in the process had flagged or even considered the possibility that M. Howe and the husband of Cassandra Whitfield Howe might be the same person. The left hand had not consulted the right hand. In a company managed with Marcus's preference for compartmentalization and clean lines, this was not surprising. What happened next was Marcus's decision, and I want to be precise about this because precision matters here. He did not engineer the situation. He did not rearrange the schedule or insert himself into the process. What he did, the one active choice he made, was decide not to recuse himself. The review was legitimate. His role in it was legitimate. He would conduct it, and he would conduct it, he told Adaze firmly, with absolute professional integrity. Every assessment would be accurate. Every recommendation would be grounded in evidence. Cassandra would not be advantaged by their relationship, and she would not be disadvantaged by the events of the previous months. You understand, Adaze said carefully, that you will be required to disclose the relationship at the commencement of the review. Yes, Marcus said. I'm aware of that. And that disclosure is the moment she will know. Yes, he said again. I know. The review was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the second week of December. Marcus arrived at the Vantage Group offices at 8:45. He was dressed in the way he always dressed for formal professional occasions, well, but without exhibition, the clothes of a man who has no need to use appearance as argument. He was carrying a leather portfolio and a small paper coffee cup, and he signed in at the reception desk with his name, and the receptionist typed it into the system without looking up, and nobody in that lobby knew what the next 90 minutes would contain. The senior directors gathered in the main conference room at 9. There were 7 of them, assembled with the cautious energy of people who have been told their performance is being evaluated by someone they have not met. Cassandra was the third person to enter the room. She was wearing the dark jacket she wore when she wanted to signal authority, and she was already in controlled performance mode, which meant her posture was excellent, and her expression was precisely calibrated between confidence and collegial warmth. She took a seat near the center of the table. She did not see Marcus until she sat down and looked toward the head of the room. The moment she saw him, her expression did something complicated and rapid, a flash of genuine confusion, then a recalibration, then the social mask reassembling itself over the confusion with practiced speed. But not quite fast enough. A woman named Patricia, seated to Cassandra's left, noticed the flash and filed it away for later examination. People like Patricia always do. Marcus looked at Cassandra. He gave her the same measured, professional nod he gave each person in the room. Then he set his portfolio on the table, opened it, and said, in the even, unhurried voice he used when he wanted a room to understand that nothing in the next hour would be improvised, "Good morning, I'm Marcus Howe, representing the holding company's corporate development function. Before we begin, I'm required to make a disclosure." He paused for exactly as long as was necessary. One of the participants in this review, Cassandra Whitfield Howe, is my wife. This relationship was not flagged during the scheduling process due to an administrative oversight on our end, and I want to be transparent about it now. I've discussed this with legal counsel and have been advised that the review can proceed with disclosure, provided all parties are aware if anyone in this room has concerns about the integrity of the process given that disclosure. I want to hear them now. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight and texture. 6 people looked at Cassandra. Cassandra looked at Marcus. And in that look, in the space of it, in the unguarded second before the mask went back up, Marcus saw everything he needed to see about the state of his marriage. He saw not shame, not remorse, not the complex working through of a person confronting a significant revelation. He saw calculation, the rapid, cold assessment of a situation for its strategic implications. She was not thinking, "What does this mean for us?" She was thinking, "What does this mean for me?" He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned his attention to the rest of the room and said, "Hearing no objections, let's begin." The review itself was exactly what Marcus had promised it would be: rigorous, fair, and scrupulously professional. He was not warm with Cassandra during the process, but he was not cold. He gave her the same attention he gave the others, the same level of question, the same degree of follow-through. When she answered well, he noted it. When her answers were thin, he pressed. She was, by any neutral assessment, genuinely good at her job. Her grasp of corporate communication strategy was real. Her record advantage was solid. The promotion had been deserved. His written assessment said so, clearly and completely. What it also said, in the section on leadership development, in the careful and evidence-based language of professional evaluation, was that certain aspects of her senior leadership profile would benefit from development, specifically in the areas of cross-functional collaboration and stakeholder relationship management. These were not criticisms invented for the occasion. They were observations any honest evaluator would have made. They were, if anything, more generously framed than they might have been coming from someone without Marcus's particular view into the matter. After the group session concluded and the individual reviews were scheduled, Cassandra did not leave the building. She waited in the corridor outside the conference room with the stillness of a person who has been running calculations and has arrived at a number they don't like. When the last of her colleagues had moved on, she stepped back into the room where Marcus was gathering his materials. The door closed behind her. "You need to tell me," she said, "exactly what this is." Marcus straightened the last page of his portfolio and closed the leather cover with a soft final click. He looked at her. "It's a senior leadership review." "Marcus." "Cassandra." "How long?" Her voice was controlled but not steady. "How long have you owned the company?" "I have a controlling interest in the holding entity that acquired Vantage in the merger 18 months ago. I've held that position since the acquisition closed." 18 months. She processed this. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I tried," he said, 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was different from the one in the full conference room. This one was smaller and more specific. He watched her understand what he meant, watched her recall the promotion party, the box, the easy bright laugh she had deployed for her colleagues as she redirected the unwanted variable into the catering bin. He did not say it explicitly. He did not need to. The information was in the air between them, and there was no version of this moment in which she could choose not to breathe it in. "That was the gift," she said. It was not quite a question. "The document was a summary of the structure. Your name was in it. My name was above it." He paused. "I thought we could talk about it. I thought we would go home and talk." Something moved across her face. Then that was not calculation. It was something older and less managed, the expression of a person who has made a significant error and is encountering the full architecture of its consequences for the first time. She sat down, which she had not done deliberately. The chair was simply there, and her legs seemed to make the decision independently of her intention. "Marcus, I didn't know what was in it." "No," he said. "You didn't look." He said it without accusation. He said it as a simple statement of fact, the kind of fact that carries its own weight without any assistance from the person delivering it. He was an architect. He understood that the strongest structural elements are the ones that don't require anything additional to hold the load. "What does this mean?" she asked. "For my job." "Your assessment was positive. Your position is secure." He picked up his portfolio. "That is entirely separate from everything else." He walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, and when he turned back, his voice was quiet. Not cold, not theatrical, just quiet in the way of someone who has been planning what to say for 3 weeks and has finally arrived at the right moment to say it. The people in your life who love you, he said, are not less valuable because they don't photograph well. The things they've built for you don't stop being real because you couldn't see them. I spent 11 years building things for us, Cassandra. Some of them were structures, and some of them were smaller than that, but all of them were for us. I would have liked you to know that before I ran out of ways to say it. He left the building at 11:17. The December air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that clarifies rather than numbs. He stood on the pavement for a moment and looked up at the building's glass face and felt, in the specific and unfamiliar register of a man who has finally stopped waiting, something that was not quite peace and not quite grief, but held qualities of both. He called Adaz from the car and told her to begin preparing documents. The 6 weeks that followed were not dramatic in the ways that endings are sometimes dramatic. There were no confrontations in hallways, no scenes of operatic proportions, no moments of tearful reconciliation or furious recrimination. What there was, instead, was the quiet and thorough dismantling of a domestic structure, conducted with the same methodical care that Marcus brought to every project, an inventory of what had been shared, a reckoning of what could be fairly separated, a series of conversations managed with the assistance of people whose professional training was specifically designed to keep emotion from destroying the practical work that needed doing. Cassandra retained her position at Vantage. Marcus had been explicit and firm on this point with both his legal team and his operations director. Her employment was a matter entirely divorced from their personal situation, and any suggestion of interference in either direction would be dealt with immediately. She was good at her job. The company needed her in that role. The terms of her promotion would stand. What changed, gradually and then completely, was everything else. There were people in their shared world who took sides, because people always do in these situations. Derek Pullman, who had once shaken Marcus's hand and called Cassandra a great lady, navigated the revelation of Marcus's ownership with the smoothly adaptive cheerfulness of a man who has always understood which way the organizational chart points. He was notably warmer with Marcus in subsequent interactions, a warmth that Marcus accepted with the polite and entirely non-reciprocal courtesy he extended to all people he did not trust. Gabriel, the old friend, the dinner party host of 11 years ago, called Marcus 2 days after the building meeting and asked, with the directness of someone who has earned the right to be direct, "Are you all right?" Marcus thought about this for longer than the question might have seemed to require. "I think so," he said finally. "I think I am." Did she know? Before the meeting, I mean. Did she know what she was throwing away? At the party? No, not in that moment. But she knew other things, Gabriel said. Things about how she was treating you. Yes, Marcus said. I think she knew those things. The settlement was finalized in late February, 14 weeks after the promotion party. It was fair by every legal standard. Adezi had been precise, and Marcus had been, as in all things, more concerned with clarity than with advantage. The house was sold, the equity divided cleanly. Marcus moved into a temporary space while the project he'd been quietly designing for himself over the previous year, a modest, beautifully considered house on a plot he'd purchased 2 years before, moved toward completion. He had designed it with the particular attention a person gives to something they are building entirely for themselves, and the result was something that made 2 of his colleagues, when they saw the plans, ask him who the client was. "No one you know," he said, and smiled for the first time in a while. Cassandra, for her part, did something that Marcus would later describe as the thing about her that still, despite everything, spoke well of her. 6 weeks after the settlement, she appeared without prior arrangement at the offices of Marcus's consultancy and asked to speak with him. He saw her in the small meeting room adjacent to the reception area, a room that was all glass and clean lines and a single orchid on a white table, because Marcus's staff had learned over time that the quality of the space said things the people in it sometimes couldn't. She did not apologize for the marriage. The marriage had been a collaboration, and its end had required failures from both directions, and she was intelligent enough to understand that a unilateral apology would be a dishonest simplification. What she said instead was this: "I spent 8 years at that company building something I thought was entirely mine, and you were there the whole time, not undermining it, not taking credit for it, just there. And I made you invisible because I thought invisible meant lesser. That was wrong, and I don't think I have a better word for it than that." Marcus listened to this in its entirety. Then he said, "You were good at the job before the acquisition, and you'll be good at it after I'm no longer involved in the ownership structure. What you built there is yours. I meant that when I wrote it." She looked at him for a moment. "You said that in the note, in the gift." "Yes, I didn't read it. I know." She left shortly after that. Marcus sat in the glass-walled room for a while after she'd gone, listening to the small particular silence of an office building in the middle of the day, and he thought about the word she'd used: invisible. He had never felt invisible to himself. He had always known what he was building and why and for whom, but he understood what she meant. He had allowed himself to become invisible to her, and the question of how much of that had been his failure versus hers was one that didn't admit a clean answer. And he had spent enough of his life in buildings to know that when a structure fails, the fault line is rarely exactly where it appears to be. He picked up his phone and called the contractor on his house. The foundation pour was complete. The framing could begin the following week. They talked for 11 minutes about load-bearing walls and window placement and the particular quality of northern light in the hours before noon. And by the time he hung up, Marcus Howe was already thinking about the next thing, the good thing, the quiet and solid and patient construction of a life that did not require anyone else's validation to be fully, genuinely real. There is something this story keeps returning to, even after all the pieces have settled into place. It is not the dramatic moment in the conference room, though that moment carries its own specific gravity. It is not the party, though the party is where everything became visible. It is the document in the bin. A single folded page, sitting in a catering bin in a hired reception room, containing information that could have changed everything, not because of its legal implications, not because of what it meant for status or position or the balance of power in a marriage, but because it contained in its last folded quarter a note in Marcus's hand that said, "Everything you have built is yours, and everything still to build is better than you know." He had meant it as a beginning, and it was, in the end, exactly that. Just not the beginning he'd imagined. The things we build in silence, the careers, the investments, the careful and unhurried accumulation of a meaningful life, do not require an audience to be real. They do not require acknowledgement to hold weight. They stand on their own terms, in their own time, and when the moment comes that they must be seen, they are seen completely. The ground does not care whether you noticed it was there. It holds you up regardless. Marcus understood this, had always understood it, and it was perhaps the truest thing about him, that he had built his world with the same integrity whether anyone was watching or not. The measure of a thing is what it does, not how it appears. And the measure of a person is who they are in the quiet moments, in the ordinary rooms, in the spaces between the visible achievements where most of life actually happens. If you've been carrying something that hasn't been seen yet, something real and solid that the people around you have walked past without noticing, I want you to remember this evening and this story. The building is not less real because no one has read the plans. The foundation is not weaker because no one watched it being poured. Keep building. Keep your name on the work. The moment of visibility, when it comes, will be enough. Now, I need to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or your country in the comments, because this community spans more of the world than you might imagine, and I love knowing that. And if this story stayed with you, if it hit something true, please hit that like button and subscribe so you're here when the next one arrives. There are more stories coming. Stories about patience and hidden strength and the quiet kind of courage that doesn't make noise until it absolutely has to. You don't want to miss them. I'll see you there.